Welcome to the lecture on intrusion prevention and detection. Intrusion detection is the process of monitoring the events occurring in your network and analyzing them for signs of possible incidents, violations, and imminent threats to your security policies. Intrusion prevention is the process of performing intrusion detection and then stopping the detected incidents. These security measures are available as intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, that is IDS and IPS, which become part of any network to detect and stop potential incidents. In this chapter, we are going to study about various intrusion prevention and detection techniques. So first we will see what you mean by intrusion. An intrusion is the act of gaining unauthorized access to a system so as to cause the loss or harm. Example of the intrusion include the following, that is unauthorized login to a system by illegally acquiring a password. Worm infections that uses system as a launch pad to spread and infect other machines. The injection of spyware that passively monitor the activity of the user and relays this information back to the attacker, that may be over the internet. The next one is flooding. Flooding the host with spurious connection requests that attempt to exhaust the target's resources such as processing power, memory, or communication bandwidth. The two way of handling intrusion are intrusion prevention and intrusion detection. So first we will see what do you mean by intrusion prevention system, IPS. Intrusion prevention anticipates various kind of attacks and takes step to forestall their occurrences. The programmer should adopt practices that help reduce or eliminate software vulnerabilities. The use of safe string manipulation function in C, C++, and the use of parameterized SQL queries are some of the practices recommended to protect buffer overflow and SQL injection attack respectively. Likewise, even sanitizing user input from HTML form is one preventive measure against cross-site scripting attack. Another set of preventive measures may be taken by computing system to provide a second line of defense. Hence, again the buffer overflow vulnerability is a prime example. Many attacks can be prevented by properly configuring firewalls and timely application of software patches. Extensive training should be imparted to the system administrator on this and the related task. Finally, the user should be trained to adhere to sound security practices such as password protection and be educated on the variety of social engineering attacks. One final aspect of intrusion prevention is deterrence. Hacking, whether for fun or profit, is a criminal offense. The penalty for cyber attack can far outweigh the thrill of successful hacking or finance. Next, we'll see about intrusion detection systems. An intrusion detection system IDS perform the following three tasks. First, it will monitor the event of interest occurring in the target system or in the network. An event of interest may be a system call. For example, open a file containing sensitive data. Another event of interest may be attempted establishment of TCP connection from a specific IP address to certain port number. An IDE generate large amount of data which is then analyzed and converted into valuable information to be used by system administrator. The IDE create a database of interesting events. It raises an alert each time it observes any such event. For example, it might be programmed to raise an alert if more than 70% of the packet arrived within the last 10 minutes arrived from a never seen before IP address. So there are a number of key questions related to ID functionality and deployment. That is, what are the variables that the IDS should monitor? Where should a alert to be raised, and when should an alert to be sounded, and where should the IDS be placed? So we will see a case study related to this. Just go through this figure. So here the system will monitor various system and network variable, and then it will analyze the recent value and behavior of the variable. Then based on this, it will check whether the value or behavior, whether it will matches with any attack pattern. If it is yes, it will raise an alert or alarm. Otherwise, it will check whether it is an anomalous behavior. If it is yes, then it will raise as the alarm. Then next is a case study about unauthorized user logins. So to prevent unauthorized login that comprised of passwords, there must be set of rules which we will follow. This is same as what we will follow for our passwords. The password should be of at least 8 characters long, hard to guess, and include at least one non-alphabetic alphanumerical character. A password should be changed at least once in 2 months. The password should be stored securely and should not be communicated to friends, relatives, and co-workers. After 3 consecutive unsuccessful attempts to a specific account, the system should be designed to disable all further login attempt for next 20 minutes. So here if you see, the rules 1 and 2 must be enforced by the system itself. But if you will go for the third rule, it involves only user. If you go for the fourth rule, it involves only system. So these rules are all measures intended to prevent the intrusion. As a further preventive measure, a high security organization may mandate two-factor authorization, that is password in conjunction with biometrics. In addition to prevention, IDE may also deploy to monitor suspicious logins. For example, consider an employee who for 5 years has never logged in out of the office hours. That is, you can consider he never logged out between 9 to 5 p.m. If now after 5 years the same user were to log in at 4 a.m., the IDE should raise the alarm. The other example, consider that 10 unsuccessful logins have been made to the same login account over a 2-hour period. An IDE should be smart enough to sense the password guessing attack even if these login attempts were sufficiently spaced out. It should respond by disabling all further login attempts until the system administrator has been alerted. Next we will see about type of intrusion detection systems. A real-world IDS monitors and mines hundreds of variables for interesting pattern. The table will show the sample of variables together with a condition that may trigger an alert. Some of these variables are mere bit patterns in the packet header or the packet payload. Other variables are count of certain occurrence within the time interval. So just look at some of the events in the table. The first one, variable monitored, is number of access to a specific file. The event of interest is suddenly the access to that specific file increases 10 times over the normal. So it may be indicating a denial of service attack or a flash event. Similarly, consider the second example. Variable of interest is login frequency to particular account. So if it is unusually high, it is the event of interest. Then the system can consider it an attempt to break in. Similarly, it follows the remaining events in the table. We will next classify the intrusion detection system based upon their functionality. Based upon its functionality, it is classified as anomaly versus signature based IDS, host based versus network based IDS. So first we will see about anomaly based IDS. Anomaly based intrusion detection involves making a determination whether the behavior of the system is statistically significant departure from the normal. The IDE will have to learn over time what constitute normal activity usage and behavior. The definition of what is normal may vary as a function of time of the day or a day of the week. What is normal may also vary from one host to another. Note that the previous table what we have seen is an anomaly based IDS, and there it is shown which variables are monitored. Just consider the example of monitoring the number of TCP sync packets and finish packets in each successive 10-second interval. A large number of sync packet versus finish packet indicate several half open TCP connection and possibly the onset of sync flooding attack. So basically, sync packets are used for a three-way handshake purpose. To establish a TCP connection, the source will send a sync packet to the destination. So the next one is fin packet, or it is called as finish packet. It is usually sent from server or client to terminate a connection. So if there are more sync packets than finish packet, means it will indicate there are many number of half opened TCP connections. So in an anomaly based IDS, it is the absence of normal behavior that will indicate an attack. The next one is signature based IDS. So in signature based intrusion detection works by identifying specific pattern of events or behavior that portend an attack. A signature based IDS maintain a database of known signatures. It attempts to obtain a match between currently observed behavior of the system and an entry in this database. A real-world signature-based IDS will have thousands of attack signatures against which to compare. An example of an attack signature is a specific byte sequence in a worm payload. So to an anomaly based IDS, it is the absence of normal behavior that will indicate an attack. While for the signature based IDS, it is the presence of specific signature that will raise us an alert. The next one is host based versus network based IDS. So we'll see what I mean by network based IDS. An IDS that capture information about packets flowing through the network is referred to as network based IDS. For reason of performance, it is common to have standalone appliances that perform network-based intrusion detection. They typically run only the IDS and hence not vulnerable to various worms and virus attacks. They may be deployed at multiple points in a large organization. The host-based IDS is typically implemented in software and resides on top of host operating system. Its main job is to monitor the internal behavior of the host such as sequence of system calls made, the file accessed, etc. For this purpose, it make use of system logs, application logs, operating system trails to identify events related to intrusion. Operating system logs, for example, keep track of when users log in, the number of unsuccessful login attempts, the commands executed, network connection made, etc. The application logs keep track of which files have been opened or which registry keys have been accessed during the run of an application. They may also monitor what system calls are made and in what order. The file system integrity checker, for example, it will compute cryptographic hash on the content of the file. They detect file changes by comparing the computed hash of the file to its stored hash. Two desirable features of IDS is speed and accuracy. Speed is especially important in fast spreading internet worms. For example, early worm detection and an early response mechanism such as autonomous system shutdown can help to reduce the number of infected machines. The idea should be able to detect every instance of an intrusion. An undetected intrusion is referred to as false negative. The IDS generates a false positive if it raises an alarm even though there is no intrusion currently occurring or about to occur. Two aspects of IDS accuracy are again sensitivity and selectivity. High sensitivity implies a low false negative rate, while high sensitivity implies a low false positive rate. Next we'll see about what do you mean by distributed denial of service attack and how it can be prevented and detected. The distributed denial of service attack is a malicious attempt to disrupt the normal traffic of a target server or network by overwhelming the target or its surrounding infrastructure with a flood of internet traffic. You can just consider the example of traffic jam at highway that prevents the regular traffic from arriving at its desired destination. So here the main purpose of DOS attack is to consume the resources of victim to the point where it crawls to halt. So here in order to prevent distributed DOS attack, there are two measures. That is, one preventive measure at the host, the next one is preventive measure inside the network. One possible way of handling sink attack is to drop request for TCP connection. But it will damage if the victim is unable to distinguish between sink packet that are part of an attack and those from its legitimate clients. One way to reduce collateral damage is to categorize IP addresses as almost certainly genius and probably spoofed, etc. The almost certainly genius address are those with whom normal connection were established and terminated in past. The under moderate load condition, all incoming sync requests are entertained. However, under rapidly increasing load, packets with unfamiliar source addresses are discarded with high probability. The another strategy is that is under high load conditions is to allocate a full buffer of almost 300 bytes for a given TCP connection request only upon completion of the three-way handshake. While the connection is still half open, minimal information about it is stored in the hash table called the sync cache. This information includes the TCP sequence number and source and destination address and port. An alternative to sync cache is the sync cookies. So here the sync cookies, which stores no state information at all for each half open connection. Instead, the responding machine places a cookie within the sequence number field of the second handshake message. The cookie is computed as a hash function of the source address, source port, destination port, and a secret. The initiator of the connection dispatches the cookie it just received in its acknowledgement message. Upon receiving the acknowledgement, the responder recalculates the cookie and verify that it matched the value enclosed in the received acknowledgement. Only then does it reserve buffer space for the connection. The next is about preventive measures inside the network. One of the approach to frustrating distributed DOS attack is to implement measures close to the source of the attack. One such measure is egress filtering. Most distributed DOS attack packets use spoofed IP address. The egress router is the last router encountered by any packet generated inside the network before it exits that network. Let A be the set of all externally visible IP addresses within the network. The egress router examines the source address of each packet leaving it. If the address does not match any address in A, it drops the packets. By thus detecting and filtering spoofed packet, it helps to prevent DDoS attack. The idea of egress filtering has been extended to routers in the core of internet. Internet routing is done based upon destination address contained in the packet. A filter, on the other hand, uses the packet source address to make a decision on whether or not to discard the packet. To implement distributed route filtering, a filter maintains for each of its interfaces. To implement distributed route filtering, a filter maintains for each of its interfaces the set of all source addresses from which packet arrives en route to some destination. The routers uses border gateway protocol routing information to obtain the latest mapping between each of its interfaces and the subset of source addresses using that interfaces. A filtering decision is very straightforward over here. If the packet with source IP address, if it is equal to yes, arrives via an interface that it should not have, the packet is assumed to be spoofed and hence it is discarded. To understand this, you just consider this particular example. So here this is a router implemented distributed route filtering DRF. Each of its interface is marked with the source address, that is this one, these are the source address that uses that interface en route to some destination. The packets from same source may enter the router through different interfaces. For example, if you consider the source address as 7, it may arise from the interfaces B, C, or it can come through D. So, two packets arriving from source address 7 via the same interfaces can have the different destination. Also, two packets bearing the same source and destination pair may arrive on two different interfaces if there exists multiple shortest path between the source and the destination. In the simplest implementation of the filter, the router checks whether a packet has arrived on its acceptable interface based only on the packet source IP address. For example, if you consider the source address as 7, if it arrives through an interface C, it would be forwarded. However, if another packet with the same source address, if it comes through E, that is, if 7 comes through E, would be suspected of having a spoofed source address and will be discarded. Let's see how distributed DOS detection will work. So you can see in the figure, in a sink flood attack, the victim can see a disproportionate number of sink packets compared to the fin packet. By a sink packet, we means that any incoming packet with the sink flag is set. And also we are knowing that the packet is a TCP connection request packet. Likewise, fin and reset packets are respectively those with fin and reset flags are set. A fin packet is sent by the side that wishes to terminate the TCP connection. If the other party agrees for termination, it responds with its own fin packet. So here you can see A wants to terminate the connection, so it will send the fin packet to B. The fin B will respond with the acknowledgement for that. Along with that, it will send its own fin packet. So usually these SYN and FIN packets always occur in pairs. If you have one SYN sync message, then you will have one FIN message from that client. TCP connection that terminate normally usually involve one sync packet, that is from the client, and a corresponding FIN packet to initiate or to terminate a connection. Thus, what we can consider is the total number of incoming sync packet should equal the number of incoming FIN packets. Just look at this figure. So it will show two horizontal timelines. This particular timeline shows that time of sync packet arrival, and this particular timeline shows the corresponding fin arrival. So here the time slot is divided into fixed length observation time interval, that is T1, T2, T3, etc., during which we record the number of sync packet arrives. The corresponding observation interval in the fin timeline is divided into T1 dash, T2 dash and T3 dash, and you can see this fin time interval is shifted right by an average duration of TCP connection, because sync connection will always arrive first. Fin connection will show termination of the connection. So if you want to construct an anomaly detection system, we define some set of variables. Let Si be the number of sync packet arrived in the ith observation interval, Fi be the number of fin packet arrived in the ith observation interval. Let Di be the normalized difference between number of sync and fin packet in the ith observation interval. That is, we can define Di as Si minus Fi by F. Let tau be the threshold for detection. Consider the time series D1, D2, D3, etc. So now we can present different algorithms that attempt to detect the onset of sync flood attack by monitoring the above series. So the first algorithm 1 will says that raise an alert if the most recently computed detection variable Di exceed the threshold, that is if Di is greater than T1. So here you can see this figure. It will show the D value versus time with a threshold which is set to 90. Some of this problem with this approach is, the first problem is the IDS may rise and falls alarm since it bases its decision based upon one point, that is whether value is greater than threshold value. So here the value of D will rises to above 100. You can consider it as 1 or 2. That will trigger an alarm. However, this alarm is unwanted since if you check the neighboring values of D at this point, they are below the threshold. These values are below the threshold. So, a modest spike in D at one point is very unlikely to result in memory exhaustion, but it does cause the IDS to rise an alarm. You just consider the next example. The value of D1 between the values 28 and 33. These values are below the threshold. The cumulative effect of the attack pattern access the interval with crypt the system, but this algorithm will not raise any alarm for this. So, the next two solutions what we will discuss, it will consider the cumulative effect of the previous values of D. So the second algorithm, it will raise an alarm if the smooth average of the previous value of D exceed the threshold. So this approach will use the well-known techniques, that is exponential smoothing. The decision variable at the end of ith observation interval is the smoothened average, that is SI is computed as SI is equal to alpha into DI plus 1 minus alpha into SI minus 1, where alpha lies between 0 and 1 and S naught is equal to 0. So this particular above recursion expression for SI can be expressed iteratively by repeating the substitution of S I minus j in terms of S I minus j minus 1. So what we will get is this particular alarm. So here an alarm will rise if SI exceeds a threshold T2. The value of T2 is set based on the empirical data. If it is too slow, it will result in many false positive. If it is set too high, it will result in false negative. The third alarm, it will it will define a modified cumulative sum of previous values of D and raises an alert if this value exceeds a threshold. So this method uses a technique called as sequential change point detection. So in this, during normal operation, the number of fins will balance out the number of sync packets and hence DI will be close to 0. Let define U as the upper bound on the mean of DI during normal operation. Let DI dash be a shifted version of DI, that is DI dash is equal to DI minus U. So the decision variable Mi used here will be computed using this formula. So we'll see what is this. So just look at these two diagrams, first one and second one. In the first here we will make use of this. So here we first will define U, which is the upper bound on the mean of DI. U is defined as 40 over here. So then consider this diagram. So here Mi is calculated using this formula. So here di dash is di minus u, that is basically di is this portion, u is this portion. So this will be di dash, this portion, that is di minus u. So this diagram is shifted. You can observe over here. So now we can consider some example. So in the second diagram, which is time against the value of mi, we have set a threshold as T3 which is equal to 150. So at the time 1, if you observe here, go through this diagram, di value is less than u is 40, di value is less than that. So mi value will become 0 because we are showing only this part of the diagram is corresponding to this. So between time 2 and 6, if you observe, 2 and 6 if you observe, it is slightly above u. So mi will increases monotonically. Between 7 and 12, if you observe, the value is below u. So mi decreases into 0 and remain that till interval 12. The interesting interval, it is between 27 and 33. So here di value is consistently well and it is above the value of u. So this will causes mi to increase and it overshoot the threshold T3 is equal to 150. This will cause an alarm to be sounded due to a cumulative buildup of sync attack packets. So algorithm 3, the false positive and false negative which are encountered in algorithm 1 can be avoided using this algorithm 3. Next we'll see what you mean by IP traceback. The source IP address in the attack packets are typically spoofed. Hence we cannot rely on these to identify the subnet from where the attack packet comes from. So instead of that, we will go to identify the path that is traveled by the attack packets. So there are basically two principal approaches for IP traceback. So we can go for either packet marking, that is the packet keep track of routers that it will visit. The other one is packet logging. In this, each router keep track of packet that will pass through it. So both these methods require the cooperation of core router. In addition, we will have an hybrid approach using the combination of this packet marking and packet logging. So first we will see what you mean by probabilistic packet marking. Consider for a moment that every intermediate router were to append its 32-bit IP address to each packet it forwards. That is, we will go for packet marking. So here we need to vary or we need to add the packet will keep track of the routers that will visit it. So in packet we have to add some additional information to see what are the routers it has been visited. So here we are going to add, or each intermediate router is going to add a 32-bit IP address to each of the packet it will forward. So a packet on the internet, in an average it will travel 10 hops. So total we need additional 40 byte to keep track of the path from source to the destination. So usually this is unacceptable because it will become a overhead, per packet overhead. So instead, existing but infrequently used fields in the IP header are used to keep track of the routers visited. So the IP header has a 16-bit ID field. This field provides support for packet fragmentation and reassembly. So different networks have different restriction on the size of the datagram they can carry. So they may need to split a datagram into 2 or more fragments and send each of these fragments separately. The routers that present at the destination end has the responsibility of reassembling all these fragments to create the original packet. So all these fragments will carry same number in their ID field. So they can be identified for reassembly. So one of the assumption is that ID field is unused. So traceback schema will employ the probabilistic packet marking uses this ID field to store partial information on intermediate router. But given that the length of each IP address is 4 byte, how can a packet store router address information in its 16-bit ID field? So, answer for this lies on computing a global fingerprint value into the ID field of a packet with probability P. So here we could overwrite a previously written fingerprint of a router closer to the source of the attack. So to identify the perpetrator of the attack, the ingress router at the victim end will need to collect sufficient number of packets that all are part of same flooding attack. The next one is packet logging. So alternate approach to packet marking is packet logging. Here each router has to keep track of every packet that will pass through it. So while a packet make use of idea of router's fingerprint, packet logging make use of the idea of packet fingerprint or digest. This is computed using a well designed hash function on that distribute the hash value uniformly across all possible hash inputs. So here the interesting feature of packet logging is that it can help to track even a single rogue packet. So first we will assume that each router will store each packet received by it in the last 5 minutes. Suppose the victim wishes to obtain the exact path followed by a packet received by it. So here the idea is that victim's ingress router, for example A, it will query each of its adjacent router whether they have seen that packet. That is, in this example, just consider A wishes to trace back the path of the packet. So first A will query its neighbor routers, that is in this case B, H and G. One of the router, let it be B, will respond positively. Then B will query its neighbors, that is C and M. Then one of that respond positively, then contacts its neighbors and so on until the source of the packet is traced. So here the problem is the storage requirement at each router implemented in this schema would be prohibitive. So these storage requirement can be further reduced by the use of space efficient data structure called as Bloom filter. So before using this, we will see about some of the notations used in this. So here n is the maximum number of packet to be stored in a router in the given interval. Here interval is considered as 7 minutes. Each time an element has to be inserted, one or more hash functions on that element need to be computed. Let k be the number of distinct and independent hash used. So k is a design parameter. The output of each function is returned a W bit quantity. The Bloom filter is basically a bit array. Let M is equal to 2W be the size of this array. Now we'll see how packet insertion will take place. So when a packet enters the router, the cache hash has computed on its content. To speed up the computation, the hash are only computed on the invariant part of the IP header and a small part of the payload, say 10 bytes. Suppose the k hash computation yield the value I1, I2, I3 up to Ik, then k hash outputs are used used as indices into the bit array. So to insert a packet, bits in these positions are set to 1. So if one or more of them are already set, they will remain unchanged. So here neither the packet itself or nor the computed hash are stored. Instead, only the relevant bits are set. The next one is packet presence check. To check if a packet P is present in the Bloom's filter, compute K hash on it as done during the packet insertion. Suppose K hash function computes yields I1, I2 up to Ik, then check whether each of element of the Bloom filters are set. If one of these element is 0, P has not been encountered by that router. But however, all K elements are set, it is not necessarily true that the router has encountered P during the current time interval. On the other hand, this is called as false positive. This will result in false positive. On the other hand, there is no chance of false negative with Bloom's filter. Now we will see this with the help of an example. So here you can see how a false positive may occur. So here a router is presented with a packet called as P7 and it is being asked whether it has encountered this packet. So first it will compute hash H1 on P7, H2 on P7 and H3 on P7 and it will look to see if the corresponding bits in the Bloom filters are set. So it will check whether the corresponding bits, this H1 of P7 will yield these indices. So it will check whether that bit is set. Similarly, H2 of 7 will yield this particular position. So it will check whether that bit is set. Similarly, H3 of P7. So here, these bits have been set respectively by the application of, so look, these bits are set by the application of H2 on packet H2, this particular bit H2 on packet P1054 and H1 on packet P309 and H1 on the packet P7 before. So you can see, you have to see what values with respect to this point. This is set by H2 on P105 and the next one, this value, it is set by H1 on P7.